Nikola Tesla was a gift to our humanity from Venus. He was the world's greatest inventor, a pioneer blazing the trail. He had patents for 1,200 inventions, including operating a car without any fuel. He wrote an autobiography, which was given to Arthur H. Matthews. Matthews included Tesla's autobiography in his book called The Wall of Light, Nikola Tesla and the Venusian Spaceship, the X-12. It was published by Health Research Books. Tesla was born on July 9, 1856, on a UFO that landed at midnight. Most probably it was the Venusian spaceship, the X-12. He was given to a good family in Serbia. It is believed that Arthur H. Matthews was the illegitimate son of Tesla. From boyhood, he was close to Tesla. Included in the book is a picture of a painting of Matthews, which closely resembles Nikola Tesla in his later years. Matthews might have been the son of the wife of a helper of Lord Kelvin, a British scientist. Nikola Tesla helped Matthews to build an instrument on Matthews' 100-acre property in Canada that would alert him to the arrival of the X-12 spaceship from Venus. In his autobiography, Tesla referred to his father, who was an Orthodox Serbian priest, as his Earth Father. Tesla knew he was from Venus. Nikola is the name of his family's town in Venus. Spelled reversed, it is Alokin. He said his father was a very erudite man, a veritable natural philosopher, poet, and writer. He had a prodigious memory and frequently recited at length from works in several languages. He often remarked, playfully, that if some of the classics were lost, he could restore them. Tesla had a photographic memory. He could recite page after page of nearly every classical work, Goethe, Voltaire, or Shakespeare. Literature and art were a source of joy and exhilaration. He spoke and wrote in 12 languages. He was an accomplished calculator who had little use for tables and textbooks. Tesla was lovable and very loving, without any trace of arrogance. He admitted that he laughed at a joke a year later when he got its meaning. He was a poet and, like his Earth Father, knew entire books by heart, word for word. While walking with his friend in the city park, he recited a passage in German of Goethe's Faust. Then, the idea came like a flash of lightning, and he saw the images of the invention of his motor. He says in his autobiography, "Like most children, I was fond of jumping and developed an intense desire to support myself in the air. Occasionally, a strong wind, richly charged with oxygen, blew from the mountains, rendering my body as light as a cork, and then I would leap and float in space for a long time. It was a delightful sensation, and my disappointment was keen when later I undeceived myself. During that period, I contracted many strange likes, dislikes, and habits, some of which I can trace to external impressions, while others are unaccountable. I had a violent aversion against the earrings of women, but other ornaments, such as bracelets, pleased me more or less according to their design. The sight of a pearl would almost give me a fit, but I was fascinated with the glitter of crystals or objects with sharp edges and plain surfaces. I would not touch the hair of other people, except, perhaps, at the point of a revolver. I would get a fever by looking at a peach, and if a piece of camphor was anywhere in the house, it caused me the keenest discomfort. Even now, I am not insensible to some of these upsetting impulses. When I drop little squares of paper in a dish filled with liquid, I always sense a peculiar and awful taste in my mouth. I counted the steps in my walks and calculated the cubical contents of soup plates, coffee cups, and pieces of food. Otherwise, my meal was unenjoyable. All repeated acts or operations I performed had to be divisible by 3, and if I missed, I felt impelled to do it all over again, even if it took hours. Until he was 8 years of age, he said his character was weak and vacillating. Then, he read a novel entitled Aofi. It awakened his dormant powers of will. When he practiced self-control, he experienced a pleasure never known before. Using the mind to create was not work, it was joy. His father had a large library, and whenever he could manage, he tried to satisfy his passion for reading. His father did not permit it, and would fly in a rage when he caught him in the act. His father hid the candles when he found that Nikola was reading in secret. He did not want him to spoil his eyes. But Nikola obtained tallow, made the wicking, and cast the sticks into tin forms. And every night he would brush the keyhole and the cracks and read, often till dawn, when all others slept and his mother started on her arduous daily tasks. By the time he was 11, he had read all the books in his father's vast library. One time, when he was recovering from an illness, he read the early books of Mark Twain. When he met Mr. Clement, he informed him of his illness and his recovery through reading his books. He was touched that Mr. Clement, that great man, had tears in his eyes. Tesla had 3 life-threatening illnesses. He almost drowned a dozen times, was nearly boiled alive, and just missed being cremated. He was entombed, lost, and frozen. He had hairbreadth escapes from mad dogs, hogs, and other wild animals. He had a nervous breakdown, wherein his hearing was so acute that the landing of a fly caused a dull thud on his ear. A carriage passing at a distance of a few miles fairly shook his whole body. The ground trembled under his feet continuously. He could not sleep. The bed was shaking. We cannot imagine what torture he went through. He says, "I passed through dreadful diseases and met with all kinds of odd mishaps, and that I am hale and hearty today seems like a miracle. But as I recall these incidents into my mind, I feel convinced that my preservation was not altogether accidental, but was indeed the work of divine power." In boyhood, he suffered from an affliction which contributed to his late awakening. He never knew he was an inventor until he was an adult. Images of ordinary things and scenes would appear accompanied by strong flashes of light, which marred the sight of real objects. He was unable to distinguish whether what he saw was tangible or not. He could not banish the image or scene. To free himself from these tormenting images, he continuously conjured up new images. Then he saw new scenes which were at first indistinct. Every night he could see new cities and countries. He would live there and make friendships. He said, however unbelievable, they were just as dear to him as those in actual life. He was 12 when he succeeded in banishing an image from his vision by willful effort, but he had no explanation for the strong flashes of light. They usually accompanied when he was in danger or greatly exhilarated. Sometimes, all the air around him filled with tongues of living flame. They attained a maximum when he was about 25 years old. The flashes of light protected him from harm. The incessant mental exertion developed his powers of observation. He said that these experiences helped him when he was older to visualize with facility. As a child, he did not believe that he was really special. When he was 6 years old, the family moved from the city of Gospic. Seeing the city dudes and strange people from his window in the new house was so terrifying that he said he would rather have faced a roaring lion. He was that bashful. His hardest trial came on Sunday, when he had to dress up and attend the service. There, he met with an accident, the mere thought of which made his blood curdle like sour milk for years afterwards. It was his second adventure in a church. Not long before, he was entombed for a night in an old chapel on an inaccessible mountain, which was visited only once a year. It was an awful experience, but this one was worse. There was a wealthy lady in town, a good but pompous woman, who used to come to the church gorgeously painted up and attired with an enormous train and attendants. One Sunday, he had just finished ringing the bell in the belfry and rushed downstairs when this grand dame was sweeping out, and he jumped on her train. It tore off with a ripping noise, which sounded like a salvo of musketry fired by raw recruits. His father was livid with rage. He gave him a gentle slap on the cheek, the only corporal punishment he ever administered to him. The embarrassment and confusion that followed were indescribable. He was practically ostracized until something else happened, which redeemed him in the estimation of the community. An enterprising young merchant had organized a fire department. A new fire engine was purchased, uniforms provided, and the men drilled for service and parade. The engine was beautifully painted red and black. One afternoon, the official trial was prepared for, and the machine was transported to the river. The entire population turned out to witness the great spectacle. When all the speeches and ceremonies were concluded, the command was given to pump, but not a drop of water came from the nozzle. The professors and experts tried in vain to locate the trouble. The fiasco was complete when he arrived at the scene. His knowledge of the mechanism was nil, and he knew next to nothing of the air pressure, but instinctively he felt for the suction hose in the water and found that it had collapsed. When he waded in the river and opened it up, the water rushed forth, and not a few Sunday clothes were spoiled. Archimedes, running naked through the streets of Syracuse and shouting "Eureka" at the top of his voice, did not make a greater impression than himself. He was carried on the shoulders and was the hero of the day. Among other things, he attained the unique distinction of champion crow catcher in the country. His method of procedure was extremely simple. He would go into the forest, hide in the bushes, and imitate the call of the birds. Usually, he would get several answers, and in a short while, a crow would flutter down into the shrubbery near him. After that, all he needed to do was throw a piece of cardboard to detract its attention, jump up and grab it before it could extricate itself from the undergrowth. In that way, he would capture as many as he desired. But on one occasion, something occurred which made him respect them. He had caught a fine pair of birds and was returning home with a friend. When they left the forest, thousands of crows had gathered, making a frightful racket. In a few minutes, they rose in pursuit and soon enveloped them. The fun lasted until all of a sudden he received a blow on the back of his head, which knocked him down. They then attacked him viciously. He was compelled to release the two birds and was glad to join his friend who had taken refuge in a cave. He was a self-willed youth. He thoroughly enjoyed gambling with cards. No reproach from his father could induce him to stop. He believed he had willpower to stop whenever he wished. It was his mother who gave him a roll of bills and said, "Enjoy your gambling until you ruin us." He stopped immediately. He said that if his mother was the inventor and came from a family of inventors, her father and grandfathers were inventors. She understood him, and he loved her dearly. His father insisted that he enter the clergy. This deeply distressed him. He wanted to become an engineer. After he contracted cholera, he was in bed for 9 months. He told his father that if he allowed him to become an engineer, he would get well. His father readily consented and sent him to the best schools and universities. When he went to the Polytechnic School in Graz, Austria, he had made up his mind to give his parents a surprise, and during the whole first year, he regularly started his work at 3 o'clock in the morning and continued until 11 at night, no Sundays or holidays excepted. As most of his fellow students took things, he went home for a short rest, expecting triumph, and was mortified when his father made light of these hard-won honors. That almost killed his ambition, but later, after his father had died, he was pained to find a package of letters, which the professors had written to him, to the effect that, unless he took him away from the institution, he would be killed through overwork. Nikola had a veritable mania for finishing whatever he began, which often got him into difficulties. When he came to the United States, he worked for Thomas Edison, whom he admired. He worked from 10:30 a.m. to 5 a.m. of the next day. He did not complain. When Edison's manager did not compensate him for $50,000 for his invention, as he said he would, he quit. When he was a child, he admired a picture of the Niagara Falls. He told his uncle that someday he would harness that power with a wheel. He did so 30 years later through the use of his alternating polyphase current system of electricity. Without this system, The giant steam electric power plants in our big cities and the big hydroelectric projects such as TVA, Boulder Dam, Grand Coulee would be impossible. His inventions included lasers, radio, fluorescent lighting, radar, robots, electric motors, wireless communication, free energy, remote control, X-rays, and many others. Towards the end of his life, he received payment of an honorarium by the Yugoslav government as patron of the Tesla Institute in Belgrade. It was enough to sustain him. He was an idealist whose soul wanted to help humanity. Money meant but little to him. The Venusians from the Venusian spaceship X-12 visited Tesla before he died. Tesla gave them his autobiography, which they were to give to Arthur H. Matthews in Canada.